Welcome everyone to this session. And my name is Yiming Bao. I'm from National Genomics Data Center from China National Center for Bioinformation. And I'm the moderator for this session. And we have 4 speakers in this session, and 3 of us are here on site, and one Professor Yu from Philippines is online. So let me first we would acknowledge the country to host this wonderful meeting event, and talk a little bit about this session. So the title is Implication of New Access and Benefit Sharing Regime for Global Research Using Genetic Data. So this session is organized by the DSI Scientific Network. So I'm going to just speak briefly about what DSI is and what the network is. So DSI, I stole this slide from our next speaker. So DSI stands for Digital Sequence Information, and basically, I don't know what the audience background is. If you are all in the biological field, you know that when we talk about sequence information, usually we talk about, through the central dogma from DNA, RNA, then protein. And so, so these are the most common, definition of DSI. But the real definition actually is not defined accurately. So we have different versions of it. So first version is DNA and RNA, and then DNA, RNA plus protein and epigenomics modification. And the third version is those previous ones plus other macromolecules. So this is what our subject is about. So about DSI network, scientific network, it was created in 2020. It's a unique international collaboration with 100+ members from more than 30 countries. So that network's mission is to contribute to policymakers and other stakeholders' understanding of DSI and its applications and contributions to research supporting biodiversity conservation and public health, as well as the global benefits of open access to DSI databases. So about this session, the aim is about, we are talking about DSI, but this is in the background because before, when we talk about conservation, many people know Nagoya Protocol, which was about using physical genetic resource benefit sharing. But now with the development of new technologies, so we are doing lots of sequencing. So the DSI comes into play. So it's key that the scientific community be aware of the debates and their possible implications surrounding the DSI. And this session will provide an overview of the debates on the several UN fora, so namely the Convention of Biological Diversity, CBD in short, and the High Seas Treaty Agreement on Biodiversity in Area Beyond National Jurisdiction, BBNJ, and the WHO Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing System, PAPS, and the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. And our speakers will discuss the implications and opportunities of these different and possible overlapping agreement, considering how they could improve data management to address concern about fairness and ethics, while also presenting possible challenges to open science infrastructure. And our panelists will outline some of the implications for researchers and data managers in terms of compliance, legal certainty, and capacity building. With that introduction, I'll first introduce our First speaker, Dr. Charles Lawson. So Charles is a professor in the Griffith Law School in Griffith University. He studied science and law at the Australian National University, and he also holds a PhD from the ANCU's Research School of Biological Science and Molecular Biology and Biochemistry, and the Master of Law from the Queensland University of Technology for science into gene patterning and computation. So Charles has a very good combination of biological science and also in law. So we look forward to Charles' presentation.
Thank you for coming along. Great to be here and to talk about these sorts of things. Now, what I love about this is an incredibly complicated area of law. It's the elegance of the complexity, and we're trying to get some good, just, equitable and fair outcomes. But at the heart of what we're talking about when we talk about this international law, remember we're talking about law at various levels. We're talking about the international law, we're talking about the law within particular regions, and then we're talking about the local law which would apply to our particular circumstance. So if you're a scientist, you're looking at the international sphere. You're then looking at the sort of the continental or the regional kinds of agreements, and then you're looking at the domestic kind of laws that apply to you in your particular lab. So really complicated field covering a range of different areas, and we're talking about essentially biological things. So the basic sorry, I'm not sure how to advance it. Do you know how to advance it? It's gone? Oh, there you go. Thank you. So the heart of what we're talking about is this very, very simple idea, or this very, very simple kind of transaction. On the left-hand side there, you've got what we call conservators. They're essentially somebody who has something that somebody else wants. On the right-hand side, you've got the person who wants something. It's generally people who are the technology owners, the financiers, the IP owners, those sorts of people. The idea here is to bring them together, so the people who have something that they want to give away, people who want something that they want to buy or purchase or whatever, bring them together in a contract. A contract is generally what we would talk about, some kind of agreement, some kind of meeting of minds. The idea then is that you produce something of value to the economy, however, and then you want to share the benefits back. And in an economic sense, that drives it promotes and drives that agreement. And then you can get good things out of it. You can have biodiversity conservation, you can have cultural conservation, a whole range of good things on the public good side. But you also get the financiers, they get their return on the investment, the technology holders get better new technology, whatever. And we break these benefits down essentially into two categories, the monetary benefits and the non-monetary benefits. So the idea we're talking about here, which we're trying to capture in international law, is how you bring the parties together in a way that's just and fair and equitable. Now, what's happened over time is we've developed this incredibly complicated area of I guess, framework of law. So what we've got here is that in the broad scheme, so the big square is intellectual property laws, and that's conducted by the World Trade Organization. And so that's essentially things like patents and copyright and all those sort of things. And they apply universally across the board. So they're the foundation. We then cut out of those what we would call the biodiversity kinds of agreements, and they're the ones we're going to speak about mostly today. That's talking about biological things. And we essentially break those up into the main category is the conventional biological diversity, and then we have subsets of biological materials out of the broad category covered by the conventional biological diversity. So that's the CBD and partly the Nagoya Protocol. So that covers everything. Then we cut out bits, part for the high seas, so that area beyond national jurisdiction, the high seas, things like those thermal vents, those sorts of places. We also separate out of those what's called the PIP framework, which is a pandemic influenza framework. And that's essentially just talking about human pandemic influenza. It has its own separate scheme. And then we also have now a scheme under the Plant Treaty, which is for plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, so a range of agricultural kind of plants. They have their own separate systems. So that's the biodiversity systems, but in addition to that, we also have cultural kind of international law. And remember, biological things, they can be biological, but they can also be cultural. And so there's an overlap here. So we've got an incredibly complex area of law we're talking about, and we're trying to bring some kind of of justice and fairness and equity to this. Now, a summary of the kind of agreements we're talking about today. Essentially, we're talking about the Convention on Biological Diversity. Remember, that's the one that covers everything. And then we've got the split out, the minor groups, the Plant Treaty, the PIP Framework, the BBNJ Agreement. The Plant Treaty is to plants, PIP Framework is to human influenza pandemic viruses, and the BBNJ is the biological things on the high seas. You can see on the left-hand side, just gives you a brief overview about what's covered by these agreements. For materials, it's what are called genetic resources, biological things within the state's jurisdiction. The Plant Treaty is particular kinds of agricultural plants in what's called the multilateral system. For PIP Framework, it's human pandemic, influenza, viruses, and the BBNJ is what's called marine genetic resources, and importantly, digital sequence information, or DSI. The agreements, the idea of the transaction or the contract, for the CBD, it's a bespoke arrangement. For the Plant Treaty, it's a standard material transfer agreement. It's the same contract that everyone has to sign. If you want material, you have to sign the contract. For the PIP Framework, there's a range of contracts, but they're standard contracts. If you want the virus, you have to sign the contract. And under the BBNJ agreement, we're still working it out. There's going to be a notification system, and the form of the contract or the form of the arrangement is not settled yet. We still have to work that out. The kind of benefits under the CBD, they're bespoke benefits. Whatever the parties actually agree, the benefits should be both the monetary and the non-monetary. Under the Plant Treaty, it's the standard agreement. That means that there's a fixed price. If you want to access the material, you have to pay the price. Under the PIP Framework, there's two parts. One is the price of the contract, but there's also a subscription payment you have to make. And under the BBNJ agreement, we're still working out what that's going to be. Now, importantly for us, what kind of information are we talking about? Under the CBD, really that refers and that creates a global network of essentially websites and databases. And most of the information they're talking about, they're not talking about biological information. What they're really talking about is laws and policies and those sorts of things. Under the Plant Treaty, again, they're more sophisticated. They've got a decentralised network of computers, essentially a linking of databases around the world, dealing with the kind of information that they're talking about. Under the PIP Framework, they're essentially DNA sequences, and they're covered by the GISAID and the GenBank kind of arrangements, and we'll hear a lot more about those shortly. And then under the BBNJ agreement, we still haven't quite worked this out yet. We're talking about repositories and databases, but we don't yet know what that means. Okay, now standing back, what are we talking about? What are the common themes we're talking about when we talk about the kind of arrangement or the process that follows from these kinds of schemes? Each one of them can essentially be broken down into this idea of domestic law. There has to be some kind of domestic implementation for these international laws. You need to identify who the parties are to this kind of agreement. There needs to be some kind of scheme you need to identify, so the state needs to have a scheme. Many states don't have any schemes yet, but the idea is to have some kind of scheme. And then you have some kind of permit or access or license, some kind of access arrangements. You then need to satisfy what's called prior informed consent, being changed in modern times to free prior informed consent. And the idea is that where people are giving something up, they have to consent to give that up. So to take something from somebody else, whether it's genetic resources, traditional knowledge, whatever it is, you need their prior informed consent. And then you need to satisfy the benefit sharing agreement. The idea there is that the benefits do have to flow back, the monetary and the non-monetary benefits, and they will flow back over time. In theory, that's how it worked. Unfortunately, it hasn't quite worked out that way. So we've had access and benefit sharing since 1993. That's when it came into effect. Now there's been lots of non-monetary benefits. So things like capacity building, all those sorts of non-monetary benefits, but there hasn't really been much cash. And it's really the developing countries, the low-income countries, they want cash. So they want the money, they don't necessarily want the non-monetary benefits. So while there have been lots of non-monetary benefits, the kind of benefits they really want are the money benefits. And that means we've shifted the focus to what we call digital sequence information, or DSI. And essentially the idea here is to have some kind of tax levy or charge which takes some kind of monetary benefit from accessing or using what's called digital sequence information. We'll have to work out what that is in time. Now what I want to do is just quickly take you through the kinds of developments in the various forums which are talking about this, and this is really, I guess, just to show you this is This is a live, active and moving and excitingly area of international law because it is moving in so many different places, lots of moving parts. So let's start with the World Trade Organization and the World Intellectual Property Organization. The World Trade Organization, remember, they're the ones that set out the basic idea of intellectual property, which applies to everyone, everybody, everything, everywhere. The proposals that were put forward to amend that agreement in 2011 have been resubmitted. So that's the idea of bringing the WTO agreements into line with the Convention on Biological Diversity and its Nagoya Protocol. And what they're doing is they're seeking mandatory disclosures of the use of genetic resources and traditional knowledge in patent applications. We'll see how that goes. The negotiations are just starting up again about that. In the World Intellectual Property Organization, they've just recently concluded agreement on the Treaty on Intellectual Property, Genetic Resources and Associated Traditional Knowledge. And the idea there is that in patent applications, they'll disclose the genetic resources which are used or any associated traditional knowledge. We don't actually know how that's going to work. It's a diplomatic text, so the agreement is a bit hard to understand exactly how that's going to work. Now, moving close to home for the Convention on Biological Diversity and what we're really going to talk about here today, it started with a decision 15.4, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. That essentially restarted this idea of DSI having some kind of benefit sharing, some kind of equity and fairness applying to digital sequence information. 15.9, which was part of that same conference of parties, they essentially set in motion the discussions, established the committee. That committee is now meeting and discussing. Then in the next Conference of Parties meeting, they had their decision 16.2, which was about digital sequence information. They made some key moves there. They established what's called the Kali Fund. So they established a fund, which is going to be the fund which will hold the money to distribute out the money that's going to come from these users of digital sequence information. And they also established a working group to start to develop the modalities of how this is all going to work. Further afield, the plant treaty, they're having a discussion. The details don't really matter too much other than to say is that they're also trying to engage with digital sequence information. Although they call it digital sequence information and genetic sequence data. They still don't know quite what that means, but they've got an agreement coming up, hopefully in a couple of weeks' time, where they're going to give us some indication about what they're going to, the kind of ways they're going to deal with DSI and GSD. And then there's the PIP framework, the BBNJ and the PAB system. PIP framework is going along. They're sort of seeing how it works, how effective it is. Remember, it only applies to human pandemic influenza. The BBNJ, that's the high seas. That's all the biological things on the high seas. They're meeting now to try and work out how that's going to work. It's only just a recent agreement, only just come into force in the last couple of months. And then there's what's called the PAB. That's the World Health Organization's Pandemic Access and Benefit Sharing Scheme. And we're meeting at the moment to try and work out how that's going to operate. So we'll see how that's going to operate in the following months. So lots happening. What you need to watch for, digital sequence information is what we're talking about today, but also traditional knowledge. We're not talking about it much at this meeting, but clearly cultural knowledge is going to be really important. DSI is, to some cultures, part of their cultural knowledge. That's happening in various forums at the CBD, the plant treaty. And also we need to sort out exactly what traditional knowledge means, whether it's intellectual property or whether it's something that's culturally different. But as we say, at the end of the day, what really matters now, becoming increasingly important in the future, is the provenance of the information we're talking about. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Charles, for the talk. And we'll hold the questions until Michelle's talk. So next speaker is Michelle Rourke from also Griffith Law School, and she's going to talk about the CBD's DSI multilateral mechanism and PAB system. And just a brief introduction of Michelle. She's an Australian Research Council Discovery Early Career Research Award Fellow, and her research focuses on how the United Nations Convention of Biological Diversity, its Nagoya Protocol, and other UN forums in terms of digital sequence and how to ensure benefit associated with R&D on pathogens and are shared in a fair and equitable manner. She's a member of Global Health Law Consortium and DSI Scientific Network and the Indo-Pacific Initiation on Sustainable Animal Health Corporation. Michelle.
Thanks, Yiming. Okay, so Charles just left off on some notes about the developments of what's happening in the international law space. So I want to take two of those agreements that he was talking about and expand on what's happening there, give you a little more detail on those. So specifically the multilateral mechanism for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits associated with the use of DSI. That's under the CBD, that's the one with the Cali Fund, and the yet-to-be-developed PABS system, Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing System, under the Pandemic Agreement, which was adopted in May this year. So in December 2022, Charles mentioned just before, there was the adoption of a decision by the Conference of the Parties to the CBD, and that was in Montreal Decision 15-9. And this was supposed to sort of close the DSI loophole that meant that countries could access genetic resources without actually accessing physical genetic resources, because the data for them were available pretty readily online. So there was a tension between these countries saying that genetic resources, the term genetic resources includes digital sequence information, and then some developed countries saying that no, digital sequence information is completely out of scope. And the way they dealt with this tension was to just bypass it completely and say that bilateral contracts between providers and users, like what Charles was talking about with prior informed consent and mutually agreed terms, this is just not appropriate for the use of digital sequence information, particularly if we want to keep it open access for people. So they said a distinctive solution was required, that a multilateral approach would be preferred, and that tracking and tracing of all digital sequence information was just not practical. And that while the details were still to be determined, that this multilateral mechanism would become part of what is known as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is a more comprehensive plan to address global biodiversity loss and increase benefit sharing and sustainable development and conservation. So that's that top decision there, 15.9. That was sort of the map. And then Decision 16.2 was the first set of concrete rules that the Conference of the Parties started to put around that. So the concepts were laid out in 15.9, and then in Cali, Colombia in November 2024, we've got that second decision there. And it technically came into effect then and there in November 2024, even though these are all non-binding decisions. It detailed a monetary contribution model for medium to large companies in sectors that benefit directly or indirectly from the use of digital sequence information. So that's like the biotechnical industries, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, all that sort of thing. And it provided an indicative rate of contributions, which we'll talk about shortly. Non-commercial users, such as research institutions, public institutions, are not asked to contribute any monetary benefits, only non-monetary benefit sharing, which, as I'm sure everyone knows, is already happening all the time. But they can also make voluntary contributions to the Cali Fund, and that will go to various countries around the world. That's yet to be determined how that will happen, but 50% of the benefits are supposed to go to Indigenous peoples and local communities to make sure they've got the funds to help conserve their biological resources. And they also said they'd still look at other options, other modalities for sharing the benefits associated with the use of digital sequence information. So you've already seen this slide. This is just to emphasise that we still don't actually know what digital sequence information technically means. And this is another thing that the CBD has dealt with by brushing past it. The meaning of DSI remains uncertain. There's no formal definition, and it doesn't seem like there's any intention to create a formal definition. This is kind of useful for a couple of reasons. The first one is that the science keeps evolving, so they want to keep the definition vague enough to sort of capture future types of digital sequence information that might arise, including AI-generated information. And there's also a level of constructive ambiguity going on here. So they want to make sure that the divergent views about what DSI should be as sort of captured, and keeping the definition vague enough will hopefully encourage everyone to agree on the same principles. But what this means is that in practice, we have a set of evolving international rules where nobody can really tell you definitively what the scope is. But for the purposes of the Cali Fund and any data repositories hosting digital sequence information, we can assume that it means any nucleic and amino acid sequences derived from physical genetic resources that would fall within the scope of the CBD and Nagoya Protocol. So that doesn't include human genetic resources. It would include DSI that's not already covered by the rules laid out in various domestic laws about access and benefit sharing, including various contracts you may have entered into in order to obtain physical samples to then generate that digital sequence information, and any DSI that's not covered by another international access and benefit sharing agreement that applies, like what Charles was talking about, the BBNJ agreement, or biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction under the UNCLOS rules, which is the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, for instance. So for database operators, there are some expectations from that decision 16.2 that do apply from November 2024. They're not enforceable though. This decision does say that databases should inform users of the existence of the digital sequence information multilateral mechanism. This might mean like a new pop-up sort of appears when you log on to one of the INSDC databases perhaps, that tells you about the terms and conditions and what your obligations may be. You're expected to remind submitters that they may have signed an access and benefit sharing agreement when they were accessing the physical samples that could restrict their ability to submit some of the digital sequence information to the online repository. So you might have some countries that say they don't want their data for particular genetic resources on open access platforms. It also asks submitters to indicate whether what the country of origin was and whether traditional knowledge from Indigenous peoples and local communities was used in the collection of those samples and the generation of any data. The fair and care principles are to be taken into account. I think we're mostly familiar with the fair and care principles, but there's also the trust principles, which were specifically designed for digital data repositories to ensure trustworthiness over time. So they're all to be taken into account as well. Like I said, there's still lots to be determined. So this is, as Charles was saying, that there's a lot going on in this space and there's still a lot changing even when they have made certain decisions. So the rates of contributions to the Cali Fund for users, commercial users, is indicative only at this stage. So they're saying that small or medium, that medium and large companies should be looking to contribute 1% of their profits or 0.1% of their revenue per year to the Cali Fund. And that would depend on what calculation is best for the company. They'll also accept some voluntary contributions too, but we'll see if that happens. I guess they're all technically voluntary contributions at this stage. The Cali Fund benefits, how those will be allocated to different people and different countries, we still don't know how that will be determined yet, except for the 50% going to Indigenous peoples and local communities around the world. We just still don't know whether they want to make new tools or new databases, new platforms, what have you, for actually getting the mechanism to function. They want to create a methodology for evaluating the multilateral mechanism, because you just cannot have the costs of this mechanism outweighing the benefits. And again, the interaction with other international instruments is still to be determined. So we did say previously that the DSI covered by the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund would be those not already managed by other international instruments. And Decision 16.2 says that the multilateral mechanism has to be mutually supportive of other international instruments and other access and benefit sharing laws. And it needs to be adaptable to any new ones. And one of the new ones is the pandemic agreement, which was adopted on the 20th of May this year. But it's not fully finalised yet because they still haven't come up with the pandemic pathogen access and benefit sharing agreement, which is just Article 12 of the pandemic agreement. So this slide's just here to show that it is a much bigger agreement than just the access and benefit sharing portion of it. Human pathogens, I think this crowd is pretty familiar with human pathogens. This is talking not about pathogens, but about the very small subset of pathogens that have the potential to cause a pandemic. So pathogens of all plants, animals and humans are otherwise considered genetic resources within the scope of the CBD and Nagoya Protocol. And that deals with the physical samples, and then anything that's digital sequence information would fall now under this multilateral mechanism. But then for the purposes of for pathogen access and benefit sharing, we're looking at this new agreement only for those pathogens with pandemic potential. So they haven't figured out the details yet, but the principles for this system are based on the PIP framework that Charles was talking about. And the only problem is the PIP framework only deals with physical samples, and it encourages users to put any of their genetic sequence data on GenBank or GISAID, which is the global initiative on sharing all influenza data, virus data. And yeah, there's no benefit sharing associated with that per se in the PIP framework, but for the PABS instrument, there will be benefit sharing for digital sequence information. We just don't know how that will work yet. So in summary, the CBD's multilateral mechanism is going to be the default mechanism for benefit sharing for digital sequence information, unless there's a specialised arrangement in place which could look something like the pathogen access and benefit sharing mechanism or domestic laws for digital sequence information. So this could potentially become it already is a very confusing legal landscape, but it could become more confusing for providers of genetic resources, generators and depositors of digital sequence information, data repositories, and also commercial and non-commercial users of digital sequence information. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for your talk. And now we'll open the floor for questions for the previous two talks. So anybody have questions for Charles and Michelle? Yes, Chuck, please.
Hi, I'm Chuck Cook, Global Biodata Coalition. I'm also a member of the DSI Scientific Network. I don't actually have a question, but I wanted to say that was, from my perspective as a biologist and a life scientist, quite an interesting perspective on the DSI from the legal side. I've never seen that before, so that was really interesting. I'm wondering, and I know that your lawyer is not life scientist, but in Australia, how much awareness is there of this DSI among the life science and database community?
I'd say not a whole lot. I think it's certainly growing. Thank you. I think all of the big repositories know about it, and the big data banks and things know about it. But I think with individual scientists collecting samples, I think potentially not a great deal.
I think That's right. We have a colleague who's just collecting some data about that now. And it's, as a generalisation, you say is that the institutions know about it vaguely. We've all heard of the Nagoya Protocol, but beyond that, I think most practitioners don't know, and I guess they don't understand or appreciate. For most scientists, lots of stuff comes in click wrap, cling wrap, and you just undo it and you bind the contract binds you. Most people don't go into the details. They're going to have to go into the details for the DSI. How that's going to happen, we don't know.
Yeah, I just want to follow up. It's not only the scientists, but also has a lot of effect on databases as well, because as Michelle mentioned, the database has to put lots of notes to inform both the submitters and also the users about these kind of requirements. So that and especially DSI Scientific Network are now working with some of the paragraph or kind of a template to put into the database data policy, so people are kind of very well informed about these new implementations. So just it's really a long way to educate not only the scientists but also databases, because as far as I know, probably NSDC are kind of aware of this, and big ones are knowing this, but because there are so many different databases, small scale, large scale, and we have to, that's why we think this session will be really nice to make it aware to a broader community. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah.
We're not really talking about it here yet, but clearly traditional knowledge is going to be a really significant factor, and that's going to have a huge impact on both the science practitioners, but also the databases, and how we're going to do that and how we're going to deal with the different cultural ideas about values of information is going to be really hard to do. And as a lawyer, it's fascinating, but as a person who's dealing with the information or the data, I don't know how that's going to play out. But watch the space. It's going to be really complicated. And for you guys running databases, I don't know how you're going to do it. Perhaps as an aside, I could just put in a plug-in for the plant treaty. The plant treaty has a standard form. It deals with this stuff automatically. When you get a sample, it comes with a standard contract, and all the stuff is sorted out. That's an easy way around to try and sort out some of the complexities of the CBD and the other arrangements. Is that you could, if you put it under if you use the plant treaty standard material transfer agreement, lots of these kinds of hassles will be resolved.
Does that deal with TK?
Yep. Well, it will deal with TK, but yes.
Thank you for a fascinating session. Claire Rye from the University of Auckland, and I guess with a hat of running a little repository, or helping to run a little repository, and this has been a slightly overwhelming session, I'll be honest, because I think I probably fit in that didn't pay attention, should have paid attention, am now panicking paradigm. So I guess I had probably quite a naive question of, from a legal sense, will this come in and apply to existing data as well as future data in the same or a different way?
That's a really good question. And for some things, it's going to apply to everything from the moment that it starts to apply into the future. But of course, it's going to apply to lots of things in the past as well. So this is really mostly a reputational matter for your institution, is you need to work out how you're going to respond when someone says, that's mine or that's my data, and how you go about the process you have in place to deal with those kinds of claims. Different people have different ideas about whether it applies now and into the future, or it reaches back into the past. So if you're a botanic garden, a repository of some kind, a gene bank, any of those sorts of things, these are matters that you're going to have to deal with. New Zealand has got a bit of a head start on the rest of the world in sorting some of these things out. So you've got some good rules in place for dealing with the Indigenous communities and the different kind of claims, but that's going to be complicated. So no simple answers, unfortunately. Thank you.
I'll just add to the no simple answers. So they couldn't even figure out this with physical samples. So it was like, do we only deal with do we do access and benefit sharing for the physical samples once the law comes in, so like 1993, or do we just ignore the stuff before that and only do the stuff we collect after that? And then some people were saying, well, the rules are about utilisation rather than access. So if you use a sample that was collected in 1988, do you have to follow the rules? And then some countries have come down one way, others have come down another way, and I think it's going to be another one of those things where they're totally vague about it, but it will functionally apply to probably everything.
Well, I just want to add, in terms of databases for data, Michelle talked about some requirement of put some information like a country of origin, these kind of information. So they again come back to NSDC. They're doing a better job now. Require all this information, made them mandatory when people submit the data. But for some historical samples, those information are missing. So I don't know. Ideally, we want to go back and add this information, but it's a very difficult task to finish. Yeah. So, any more questions? Well, if not, we are going to move to the next two talks. And this one will be by myself on data governance. And again, I'm from National Genomics Data Center, China National Center for Bioinformation. Just a brief introduction of myself. So I was a virology by training, and I've been working on database side for many years. And I've been working at the NCBI, National Center for Biotechnology Information in the US for 16 years, mostly on viral genome project. And then in the recent years, I was involved in the China National Center for Bioinformation, basically to create data repositories similar to those of NSDC to promote data sharing within China and in a global scale as well. So, so I'm going to let me move down. So just give you an idea of how the data repositories and databases are. So in the internationally, we have, I mentioned, we talk about NSDC. NSDC consists of three parties, namely DDBJ, DNA Data Bank in Japan, and ENA. ENA is part of EBI, European Bioinformatics Institute, and also GenBank. GenBank on the NCBI, as I mentioned before. And these are the three major ones, and also there are other repositories such as the National Genomics Data Center that I work for in China and others. So these are the key core databases. And also there are about 3,000 other open databases complementing those of NSDC, and some private databases. So these are only often one-way database that's often use the public data. They take public data but don't contribute back to the community. So as I mentioned, the international NSDC, so 3 members, and they are very important in terms of establishing international data standard, exchange data daily, and hold annual meetings. And these data are freely open to researchers worldwide. However, the development and the maintenance of these data are carried out by large groups of highly specialized biologists and software developers, engineers. And they cost a lot, cost tens of millions of dollars yearly to operate these databases. And just give you an example of how widely these databases are used by the global communities. For example, these are data from NCBI. So the web pages were viewed on average 32 millions a day, and web users every day they have like 9.5 million users, and the data were downloaded every day 350 terabytes, and the peak web hits every second they have 7,000 hits. So that's a lot. And so how do researchers deposit the data? So at the bottom I use an example of an influenza virus sequence. In this case, people when they deposit these sequence, not only just the sequence itself, but also lots of metadata, so-called. So for example, the organism name, geographic location, and collection time. So as I highlight somewhere here. And also each sequence got a unique ID, so we call it accession numbers, which is assigned, but these are also used by the journals. When they publish something, they will refer to these IDs to identify these sequences. And also there are lots of other informations that can be put. For example, you can, although in this case, although this is submitted by US CDC, but actually the sample was contributed by a country from Indonesia, so they can put a comment to fully acknowledge the origin of these resources. So this allows transparency and the reproducibility. And so there are also sequences review the DSI use in patents. So for example, this one in particular mentioned about this sequence was used, submitted by this particular people from this particular country to make use of whatever, the product for this. So it's a easy way to check, how people are used this into the final product. So for researchers access data, there are two major ways. One is, so there's the access mode is that there are free open access, such as those from INSDC, and then there are sometimes they are free, but they need registration, as a Gizzard example that Michelle mentioned. And also there are some other databases like a UK Biobank, they charge people to use this data. And the method of access, and there are two kinds. Usually, it's one of them is the direct web access, search and browse. So it's a manual and usually in small scale. And there is also API-based retrieval, so which are automated and high throughput. So the data are not only just in single format, sometimes they evolve as they get used and transformed. So for example, you can start with searching DNA sequence, and then usually once you got a sequence, you do multiple sequence comparison and try to find the variation among these sequences. And then from these variations, from this alignment, you get a consensus sequence, a protein sequence, which is eventually used for vaccine development. So over these different, like a life cycle of this research process, it is very difficult to track the use of which particular sequence is used for the final commercial product. So which means it's making this track and trace very difficult, as Michelle mentioned in her talk. So although sequence sharing are common, very common now, but sometimes in some countries, especially some developing countries, there are some challenges. For example, so nowadays big data has been generated from large-scale national research projects based on genome sequencing. However, there are some lack of genome data sharing in some countries. In particular, I use China as an example. So first of all, there were no policies to enforce such data sharing. And data sharing in NSDC are mostly publication-driven, meaning whenever people need to publish something, then they will deposit the data. And then there are some technical issues, for example, international network bandwidth and language barrier when they submit a sequence, and the complexity of the procedures of making DNA sequence submission. So these issues make data sharing very difficult. And then after all, there's no incentive to share this data because the shared data costs lots of time and effort. So in China, to take care of these issues, we established National Genomics Data Center in China. So it was established in 2019, and its main charge is to undertake integration and exchange of genomic data, and responsible for process and analysis of these data, and ensure the safety and data, and promoting the open sharing, and strengthening data exchange and the cooperation with both domestically and internationally. And then we also develop comprehensive data resources and tools. And it's compatible with major global centers like NSDC. So over the years, NGDC become a major global centers by our international peers. So, for example, in this nucleic acid research paper, the author lists NGDC together with NCBI and EBI as one of the major database providers. And NSDC now realized the importance of these national and the regional databases, so they start to initiate this global participation program. So they are calling for new members to join the NSDC. And these are some of the criteria that they set up for new members. And China is now, along with some other major databases from other regions, try to apply to be part of the member, so that eventually our data can be exchanged, so that benefit the whole community. So just to summarize, genome data archiving on NSDC is the consensus for the community. However, it should not be taken for granted, considering technical difficulties that I mentioned. And in this case, regional and national data centers can play big roles in promoting data archiving and sharing, thus are complementing the NSDC. And data exchange and integration should be established between local centers and NSDC to prevent data silos. And then it takes a great deal of effort, a sizable group of experts, and a substantial amount of funding to build and maintain a local data center. So, so that's the end of my talk. And next, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Eizadora, doctor from University of Philippines. And if I can just bring... yeah, okay. So just try to introduce Eiza. So Eiza is a professor at the Marine Science Institute, University of the Philippines. Her research institute lies in the application of omics technologies in the discovery of marine natural products. She holds a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology and was a postdoc fellow and a senior member of technical staff. She's a member of Department of Science and Technology Biosafety Committee and advocates for stronger national support for biotechnology, marine science, and scientific workforce development. So, Eiza, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yiming. Can you hear me well?
Yes. So I guess I need to control the slide for you. Just let me know when you want to.
Yeah.
She's sharing. Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sharing. Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really sorry I have to for not being there. And today I will talk about how the new agreements on benefit sharing can be directed to reduce inequities in the research community and empower researchers like me from low and middle income countries. Oops. Okay, so DSI, for whatever it has been defined so far, has been discussed a lot in the past talks in this session. And I would just like to highlight here the importance of DSI in the context of what we do, which is biodiversity research and conservation. So it's, of course, you can see it's critical and useful in many aspects of the Kunming-Montreal GBF. Of course, in addition to the monetary benefits of using DSI to develop the bioproducts, its use is critical in monitoring and conservation efforts. However, the use of DSI is unequally distributed in the world. As you can see, DSI generators and users are mostly concentrated in certain regions of the world. And you can see this with the top countries listed in the slide. Sadly, many biodiversity-rich countries have limited capacity to contribute to DSI generation and use. And so for LMIC researchers like myself, we can generate and use DSI. However, the DSI-related research is very limited in scope and not performed at the scale that we need to have a more significant impact and benefit. And like what Yiming said, definitely the open access databases are very useful and critical in our work. So open access to the international sequence databases and software is a huge help, but we have gaps. So for example, the databases so far have more organisms from temperate regions than from the tropics. And in our particular case, there are also many more representative sequences of organisms from terrestrial origin than from marine. But we have more fundamental barriers to research. For one, there's limited technical expertise. A lot of it is primarily found in academia. And this is also because molecular biology reagents are imported and are very, very expensive. So some countries do not even have local biotech companies, and we have to import the reagents to do sequencing work. There are also limited molecular labs and sequencing centers. Some of us have to send samples abroad for sequencing, which may result in longer turnaround times. And for countries that do have sequencing centers or equipment, maintenance and repair are challenging. There's also generally a limited access to advanced technologies. And with the pace of the technological advancements with AI, LMIC researchers are almost always left behind or lag behind, both in equipment and in knowledge. And of course, all of this is because we really have super limited local research funding. But when we do successfully generate DSI-related research, the benefit is often limited to knowledge generation or publications. Some research may produce invention disclosures, but not many produce patents. Moreover, I think what is more difficult for us is that even the DSI that we produce cannot be used as local products or tools for conservation and monitoring. And so I think to address these inequities, capacity building efforts must be long-term, sustainable, and scalable. Like what Michelle said, we have been doing a lot of this, international collaborations, seminars, workshops, etc. But I think combining the capacity building efforts from monetary and non-monetary benefit sharing mechanisms from the different fora, like CBD, BBNJ, the Plant Treaty, and WHO, can help increase research capacity in LMICs. In the CBD COP16, they already have identified sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation centers or support centers or TSCCs, which could coordinate these efforts. And so how can we level up LMIC research capacity? I think the first one, we can do it in phases. The first one, we really need to help researchers generate relevant DSI and fill in the gaps. Then we can capacitate the researchers to use DSI as tools for conservation, monitoring, diagnostics. These things by itself are very useful. And then lastly, we can also need to develop products so that somehow we can have a path to self-sufficiency. And so the TSCCs can support regional hubs in LMIC regions. Existing research centers can be selected so that we don't have to start from scratch. And these can be supported either by the monetary benefits from the Cali Fund or other non-monetary benefit sharing mechanisms from the other treaties. Sorry, we have a nest of birds in the backyard. These hubs can be shared molecular labs, sequencing and data analysis, and storage facilities. We also would benefit from a mechanism for access to low-cost reagents or a freezer program, and perhaps support for digital infrastructure can be established. I would like to show an example from the Philippines on how we have been doing this, but it's taken so long. As you can see, it took a long time from the proposal for the Philippine Genome Center's approval in 2009 to having an established working facility a decade later. And this was just in time for the COVID-19 pandemic. So currently, PGC has developed facilities such as the DNA sequencing facility, bioinformatics, proteomics, and biobanks. It runs R&D programs on biodiversity and health, and recently has expanded to other regions in the Philippines. So the first one was the top one. It's in Luzon, it's in Diliman in my university, and we now have two in Visayas, the middle star, and Mindanao, the bottom star. The PGC is managed by a national university, my university, and the research funding is provided by the Department of Science and Technology government. So PGC also provides training for local and regional scientists, and infusion of support from international partners could greatly increase capacity to meet regional needs. So it's really very costly to, like what Yiming said, to have these facilities, but we need to have them. And so once we have the infrastructure sustainably supported, we can also envision, and this has been going on for a while now, research programs that align with country priorities that include embedded training. So, and this can be conducted with the lead researcher from LMICs. A good example of this is the African Biogenome Project, which is led by African scientists and is funded by a lot of African national governments, international organizations, and industries. So with such models, we can have funding for programs and supported by collaborations with more established labs. These collaborative projects will result in joint advising of graduate students, publications, training, and fellowships. And in addition to technical training, short courses on the adoption of DSI applications, research management, and administration can be provided to further capacitate scientists and research centers. Also down the line, further down the line, capacity building and support for research to product pathways can be envisioned. one gap for LMICs is that research is not successfully translated into products. So basically, after the publication, it takes a longer barrier to actually have it to a product that can be used, for example, for monitoring biodiversity in a certain area, or even as we speak, commercial products. And so tools and capacity building in translational research could be envisioned maybe as an outreach for more established research centers. Capacity building in terms of having or creating incubator programs, technology transfer office, and linkages can be supported to jumpstart bioeconomy startups and build the innovation ecosystem in these countries. So with this in place, perhaps LMIC research centers can potentially create products that can help sustain this research in these countries. Locally, we also need to revisit national policies, given that there's so many moving parts and new technologies that are coming up, especially AI. And we need to look at the policies and processes such that they do not restrict research and innovation and do not impose additional administrative burden on scientists. So essentially, we have some bit of a barrier in terms of processes, permits, reports, etc. So I think in this regard, scientists need to be more involved in policymaking and making sure that we can tell them our experiences on the ground to actually have more research and innovation. And so to conclude, omics technologies that make use of sequences, nucleic acid sequences, and synthetic biology play a crucial role in modern biodiversity and biomedical research. Barriers still exist or persist. However, I think by elevating and supporting research institutes into regional centers, we can consolidate our resources and efforts and have a bigger dent at these things. This coordinated effort or approach could provide a sustainable capacity building through monetary and non-monetary benefit sharing mechanisms. And perhaps the other fora, the ones that are responsible for negotiating this, could really think about supporting the same one-stop shop regional centers to ensure that the money is collated and the efforts are sustained. And so with this, I think we can sustainably empower more LMIC researchers in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eiza, for your talk. And the floor is open for questions, not only for the last two talks, but can also go back to the previous two. So any questions? Chuck.
Yeah, this is a question for Eiza. So we haven't really talked about the challenge of staffing these centers. So do you have a problem training or finding expert staff to undertake research and then to manage the data centers? And how is that addressed?
Yeah, so actually we have a problem with staffing. So there's very limited researchers, but I think if we can consolidate it per region, that could actually decrease the barrier. And the people that we train could be employed by those regional centers. So that's one way of retaining talent, because one problem that we have is we do a lot of training. We have a lot of scientists who are trained, but they have to look for employment elsewhere. And so if we can provide sustainable employment for such scientists, then they could be retained. So the regional centers perhaps could consolidate, so we can have a critical mass. At this point, I'm not sure about the data centers yet, because even just to generate the sequence, just the actual generation of the sequence information, we still lack scientists.
Thanks, Isa. Charles here. Thank you. That's a great talk. Just a question. This is really about the practicalities. One of the problems we have when we're talking about monetary benefit sharing is we don't actually know how much money is actually needed. So we're talking about how much people can contribute, but we don't actually know what the kind of costs are that people, how much money they need to run these sort of things. Do you have a ballpark figure for how much it costs to run the Philippines Genome Center?
Oh,
Thank you.
okay, right off the bat, I don't have the numbers, but I really don't have the numbers right now. But like you can see, we really have very, very low infusion of budget to research. And so it took a long time to have the buildings put up and then the instruments. But I think even it's less. It's very. Yeah, sorry, I don't have an idea of how much. Perhaps Yiming.
Yeah. Actually, I have a question about whether this benefit. I mean, what kind of things the benefit should cover? Should they also cover the generation of sequence or just the maintenance of the databases? I mean, to me, it sounds like it should only cover the latter, not the generation. I'm not sure, but it's probably debatable. But anyway, so for our center, so we are not generating our data by ourselves. We are just collecting data from all the researchers. So we have a kind of a sizable team. We have about 60 staff, and also plus some students. They also contribute some part. And the annual budget for us is about 40 million RMB. So I don't know how much. It's like $6 million US, something like that. So I don't know whether, but compared to the budget of NCBI, so for example, I know NCBI is 150 million US dollars, so that's a lot, obvious. But of course, they have more people. They have around 700 people, and about the same for EBI, I guess. Chuck can comment. Yeah.
Thank you. I would just like to mention this from the point of view of India. We have the Indian Biological Data Center where we are not, like you just said, we're not generating the data, but we are compiling it. So anyone in India, any researcher who generates any genomic data or genetic data is mandated by the government to put that into the data center, and then the data center maintains it. So we have to get funds, of course, to generate that data, and that could be usually within the funding cycles. We do get enough funds to perform a genomic sequencing analysis, but maintaining it long term is where we get stuck, and we've had trouble over the years. So that is where the biological data, the IBDC, has come into place, and they are it's new, and a lot of researchers are finding it very difficult because we have to, first of all, submit everything to the GenBank in order to publish it. And so this double business of also submitting within India to our regional data center is a new, I would say it is still a little bit of a friction obstacle for us, but with time we will be able to. But I agree with you that generating and maintaining should be separate, so you can't have funding for both. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I just want to comment in terms of submitting for publication purpose. Submitting, you have to submit to your national data center and also to NSDC. So we have actually experienced this. So our center, one of our database, which is also, by the way, recognized by GBC, is one of the GCBR Global Core Biodata Resources. So it's being recognized by all major publishers. So that means you only need to deposit in once. So I think it's a process. Sooner or later, your data center in India probably will be recognized if you progress and matching Yeah, matching order. Yeah. So I think we are kind of doing this kind of where the things kind of, well, I don't know, pioneers probably not it's kind of a tour, but we are doing some experiment, or we are well, anyway, we're trying to do things that so that make a model for other regional data centers to, I think, more, pretty much every region or every country eventually will need these kind of national data centers for various reasons. And also I have a comment about, Chuck, you mentioned about, for Eizadora about, people, manpower. But I think for a success of a database, technical support is also very important. So we actually benefit a lot from NSDC because they've been running business for 30, 40 years. So, we've started only like 9 years ago, but we progress really rapidly because we kind of stand on the shoulder of giants. So because we benefit a lot from NCBI and the EBI because they're actually very helpful to give us technical support. So that's why how we develop so quickly. So I think in terms of that, so I think the regional or national data centers should work together with these NSDC databases to move quickly. Yeah, so that's our our experience. So any more? Did you have a question? No? Okay. Yeah.
Maybe we're getting a little bit far away from DSI here, but I wanted to point out that it's not just LMICs that have challenging financial situations. So I work for the Global Biodata Coalition, and we were founded in order to address the challenge of sustaining data resources. So even data resources in developed countries are not very well supported. Generally speaking, they don't have funding assured for a long period of time. And the additional challenge here is that the amount of data coming into the system is growing exponentially, and it's just getting extremely expensive to manage it. And that's one of the reasons INSDC wants to expand, is to share the load of managing all the data. So there's a technical challenge of managing the data, just purchasing hard disks and finding people to run it. And then there's the staffing challenge of finding people to manage the data, because as it grows, you need more staff. So there's pressure on all sides to get more money into the system, and I think that's going to be a challenge to the benefit sharing mechanisms, because it could be that all the funding that comes in just ends up supporting the additional data resources, or perhaps maybe no one will want to, but it should.
Okay. Any more comments or from the panelists?
Well, I can certainly add to that, and the concern is that, and we saw the same thing when the plant treaty was they were negotiating the benefit sharing there, is they worked out how much they thought that people would pay, and that's the amount of money that goes into the benefit sharing system there. But that really has no connection with the costs of actually running germplasm centres. And we need to change the conversation to work around to how much does it cost to run these centres? This is the amount of money we need to actually attract. And so we need to flip the way that the discussion is happening, not about how much money can you get, as into this is how much it costs. We're going to need to get this money to do these things. And we need to have that global agreement so that each of the countries can have their centres, but they also need to share so you don't have too much duplication. One of the great things about the INSDC so far has been the duplication has been beneficial, But once you start having silos, that's going to be problematic. And I don't know how we're going to resolve that because of the national interest. But I guess I'm just keen to encourage, I guess, everyone to think about, well, actually, how much does it cost? Because that's the amount of money we need, not about how much can we get. Thank you.
Any more comments or questions? Well, if not, then I'll just wrap up. So in this session, we have 4 panelists. Okay, just use this. So Charles gave us a very nice overview of access benefit sharing among all UN fora. And then Michelle, in particular, gave us a very detailed example, use the WHO PAPS system to illustrate this requirement by all these convention. And I mentioned about from database point of view, how to govern the different data, and also from how local and national data centers can complement the NSDC. And also, lastly, Eizadora give an example of how benefit sharing can benefit the local, the low and the middle income countries to establish their data centers and how they can be sustainable. So, and we have very good discussion also from the floor about various aspects. So I think we kind of achieve our goal of kind of bring this topic to the awareness of by the community. And lastly, I would thank all our panelists and also the audience for your participation. And also, I would like to thank the organizers, which is DSI Scientific Network. So I put, can you put this, my slide on? It's not this one. Oh, do I have to? Yeah, I'm not sure. Doesn't look like I have the control.
My mouse is going somewhere else. Is it up there? Yeah, the mouse is on the screen.
Yeah, but anyway, okay. So you remember the first slide? I mean the previous several slide I put about the DSI Scientific Network. So just to note that the network network membership. So membership of the network is open to researchers, data managers, and other experts who have experience working with DSI data and who are interested in help bring the voice of research community to international policy discussions. And for more information, you can contact the network. The email address is there. So you are welcome to join the network. So that I personally, I feel I learned a lot, benefit quite a bit, because all our panelists are actually members of the network. So they are very, really, they are the voice very strongly from the, from scientists, not just the, I guess in lots of these negotiations, sometimes it's run by, I'm not saying like the lawyer, but strictly lawyers, but sometimes they are taken away from the science part. So I guess it's very important to bring science back into these negotiations. So thank you again. This is the end of this session.